Do you think UFOs, the paranormal, weird history, cryptozoology, and outsider art are pretty darn cool? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to High Strangeness with your host, Steve Berg.
The video version. Whoa, folks. Welcome to another episode of High Strangeness. Today, I have my new buddy, Matthew Tannam Elgie on. Matthew, how are you doing, friend?
I'm good. I'm exhausted and I have a cold, but I'm good. How are you?
Good. That's just how we like you. Exhausted and just getting over a sickness. That's the energy. Perfect. Hey, if you don't mind, I'm going to embarrass you with a little bio really quick. Is that okay?
That's
okay,
fine.
you can plug your ears if it gets too embarrassing. Matthew is a PhD candidate studying theater at the University of College in Dublin. He is also a filmmaker, and his new documentary, Mothman, the film that never was, premiered at the 2024 Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in September. Distribution arrangements for that documentary are now being made. That is really good news. Matthew also has a Substack and a podcast called Commendable, Commotion, which I have been binging. Really love it. It also explores the intersection between the creative arts and its sinister cousins, true crime and parapolitics. And that is such an interesting sentence to me. We're going to get into that because I have a lot of questions about that. I feel like we could talk about that for 5 hours. But my friend, what is it like living in Dublin? I have never been to Ireland. It seems wonderful. It seems just fantastic.
If you were there in the 20th century, I'd be telling you something very negative, but I was born in 1997, so
Right.
I'm happy to say it's quite a nice place. It's like similar but different to where you are right now.
Right. Well, yeah, you mentioned me before we were talking. You are familiar with Omaha and have been here a few times, and you had very nice things to say about it. Like, tell us about your times in Omaha, really quick.
Oh, where to begin? It was just such a nice city. I mean, the last time I was there presenting at a PhD conference at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and it was just brilliant, amazing opportunity, just professionally and personally, for my PhD studies. I'm still in the first year of my studies, so it was just brilliant being able to do that. And I've been there a few other times because, long story short, one of my next projects is about an Omaha-related topic, the
Right.
world's most watched unaired documentary, as a matter of fact, which happened to be filmed there. So it's quite a weird story, very dark, actually. But yeah, so it's similar in nature in some ways, different in other ways to the Mothman project.
Right. Well, I mean, like I will say before we get too deep, we're gonna get into where the creative arts intersect with the strange world of parapolitics. Like that's kind of like I don't want to say put words in your mouth, the motto of your podcast. But
Sure.
You kind of reiterate that at the top, and I find that so deeply fascinating because I think now more than ever, Matthew, I have been noticing some really brilliant work being done in that realm. My friend Tanner Boyle,
yeah.
Tanner is, I think, his Substack is one of the great ones out there, kind of covering these topics, and he does. There's also kind of even this subgenre of like people kind of tackling political parapolitics and high strangeness, like with UFO cases and kind of, for instance, like what you're doing with the this new Mothman documentary, where you're taking something that is, when people think of Mothman, they just focus on the supernatural. But what you've discovered is a whole other story that came out of this area, which we're going to get into. And I don't know how much you can talk about it because it hasn't aired yet, but
I can definitely give some hints and little bit of information, and certainly when people see the film, their sort of view of the whole thing will be expanded, and certainly. But yeah, Tanner's Substack and his podcast was it Getting Spooked? It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
I agree.
And, yeah, it's just super. So they got some real good stuff coming out these days. Film coming out. What's it? Kidnap and Kill. It's called. It's a film about the I think attempted kidnapping of the governor of Michigan a few years ago. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Megan Whitmer. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, Whitmer. Yeah, yeah. So that's another one to look out for, and only recently found out about that. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff coming out these days. It's good.
Right. Well, I gotta ask you. So, how did this interest kind of arise? Because it is a very specific niche interest that you have that you seem intensely interested on, and it is kind of like that the weirdness around parapolitics. So, how did you kind of like get so interested in this stuff that you decided to make a documentary kind of covering these things?
I mean, there's no one reason, but I think, what's kind of interesting is as a teenager, I kind of was all into the idea of like doing acting.
Uh,
And then I just sort of grew out of that. I just kind of, I think it was what sparked it off was when I started writing for this a student newspaper in University College Dublin, where I study, and this was a few years ago, back when I was doing my undergraduate degree there. And I just realized, like, I just prefer this so much more to the acting stuff. I just had lost my motivation for that for some reason, and
yeah.
I think it was kind of partly immaturity kind of was why I was pursuing it. It was kind of like, and then I just kind of sort of gradually grew up, and I think part of that was just kind of realizing do what you feel most motivated to do, as opposed to kind of something that may or may not get you attention. Don't go by getting attention, go by just what your heart drives you to do and what you're intensely interested in. And so that was kind of where that happened. And so it was just a immature teenager kind of thing, wanting attention. And then no. There are more important things than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably in a nutshell where I got to that. PhD wise, with the theatre studies that I do, similar kind of thing, I suppose. It's not studying acting; it's studying theory,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing, and the behind the scenes stuff. And parapolitics, for those unfamiliar with the term, I guess some would say it's sort of the unspoken. Well, you probably have a better definition of it than me, to be honest. The unspoken part of politics. How would you define it?
Yeah, I think you're hinting around it because I totally see as far as I know, parapolitics was kind of like more of a 60s, 70s left-wing term for studying. But I might totally be wrong with that. I am not like a historian of parapolitics or conspiracy stuff at all. But as far as I know, it was an older term that was kind of forgotten about, but nowadays seems to be used a lot more.
Yeah.
Like when I think of parapolitics, I think of like Jim Keith, and I think of Kenneth or Ken Thomas, and kind of those older like left-leaning people who would write about JFK and like the octopus case and stuff like that. That felt like parapolitics to me because it was less theorizing, then it seemed like, well, they were producing facts as opposed to like theories and stuff like that. But I totally might be wrong. What does parapolitics mean to you?
For me, it's like, personally, I'm not going to come up with a probably very good definition of it, but for me, it just encompasses all the sort of murky and covert elements of maybe politics, but also not specifically politics, because I'm not a very political person. But just the sort of people would use examples like, say, let me think now. I'm working on a little short documentary at the moment called The Panic in Bethel Park. Bethel Park being where the shooter in the July 13th Donald Trump assassination attempt lived.
Right.
And it's sort of like, it doesn't really get into, I don't think it may get into some of the questions surrounding that, but it's basically about one journalist's journey when he went there to obtain the autopsy report, and when he published them, and he was the first to publish them. So that's an example some may or may not view as possibly a parapolitical story. Was there something going on? And we don't know yet. I'm not saying there was or wasn't. A more sort of reasonable example to give, or even more reasonable example to give, would be the JFK assassination.
Right.
Pretty much it's a given that some strange things happened there.
Yeah, we don't have the full story behind that. I think most people can agree. Yeah,
I'd say it's very much behind the scenes of sort of whatever you call it, everyday life. Some would say politics, power politics, but almost for me, it almost feels like behind the scenes of everyday life. There's a lot of parallels there with the theatrical kind of production side of things, all that kind of thing. So.
Right. Well, and a lot of times we get stories. I mean, like, anytime there's a war, I can speak from the American point of view. Anytime we go to war with someone, like in the Middle East or whatever, we get a certain narrative. But what's always discovered years later is that, well, there was a lot more to it than we really knew about. Different motivations, people were getting rich, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that your definition makes sense to me, where it's like, here's a narrative. And parapolitics is like, well, let's like actually lift the carpet up and see what's underneath, and maybe like, see, look behind the film projector and see how the films run through the projector. It's just examining a little deeper in places maybe people wouldn't think to examine.
Exactly, and not everything is a big sort of conspiracy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Sometimes in life these things happen. I mean, it's always very, it's interesting, and it's particularly interesting when maybe might be something that the media, just with all the other stuff going on, maybe has moved on from a bit, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think the Mothman project kind of, when we think of Mothman, as you pointed out, like, it's mainly the supernatural kind of stories that people think of about the big man with wings and red eyes and all that. And the Richard Gere, Mark Pellington film, Mothman Prophecies. Unfortunately, though, the period in between that stuff happening in the 1960s and now the Mothman Festival and all the Mothman tourism and the Mothman cookies and the Mothman cafe, and those cookies are genuinely delicious. They're just brilliant. They're absolutely amazing. I mean, there's brilliant stuff there. The museum's great too.
It is. It's so fun.
Exactly. It's research junkies Nirvana, as Nick Bryant was in his book. So it's brilliant, and I mean, but in the period between when that started up and the 1960s, most people don't know a lot about what was going on in that town. It wasn't on the tourist map. It did not have all this Mothman tourism coming in, and that's when this little crew of sort of indie filmmakers decided to make their film there in 1997, and that was. It was maybe not the best time for a film crew with cameras, particularly going in and
right. Well, if you don't mind, because let's jump right into that. Back up just a beat, if you would, and explain how this film came about. Because in the mid '90s, I've had a long interest in UFOs and all this weird, strange, unusual stuff my entire life. But I don't, and granted, I was younger, so I don't really, I may not have known about it, but the Mothman even story was not really like in the zeitgeist of the weirdo world. I mean, it was still like Keel was still kind of like almost like a cult figure. What now he's talked about much more, obviously, but how did they just say like, hey, let's make a movie about the Mothman? It seems really random to me, actually.
I think it was because the director, Doug Tannam, he is an animator, and he was asked to draw some pictures for a children's book on sort of, tales of mystery, and one of them was the Mothman. That was kind of initially where he heard the story of it, and then he read John Keel's book. But yeah, I mean, like, evidently the story of Mothman was in that children's book he was doing the drawings for. In the 90s, but other than that, there weren't that many references to Mothman and all that sort of thing. I think there was one in the X-Files, but not even anything particularly substantial. I think it was just a line in an episode briefly mentioned it. That was about it, and that was at the same time. Actually, I think that aired a month before Doug Tannam's crew came to Point Pleasant, which is just a remarkable coincidence, really. But yeah, wasn't in the zeitgeist, no. Wasn't. No.
So it was just the filmmaker thought it was, I mean, and gosh, had I been a filmmaker in the mid '90s and into that stuff, I'd be like, yeah, this would be a great movie. It's a no brainer. Is because while the Mothman itself is a fascinating cryptid or whatever you want to call it, but it's all the surrounding weird stuff that happened in Keel's book that is really interesting to me. What, because there's many manifestations of high strangeness going on, not just the Mothman. So, it was a real like Disneyland of the weird for a couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I know a bit about your film. I've heard you interviewed quite a few times, but it sounds like, and please feel free to jump in, but like that they got a small budget. They were from like a video game company, right? That was really, and then just kind of take it from there if you would. I just want to like kind of for the listeners to understand how the documentary came about.
Well, DreamWorks Interactive funded some of their video games, so they had quite a bit of money from the sales of the games and stuff like that. And so Doug, very creative individual, it's undeniable that, and, he wanted to make a movie, and, he knew people in DreamWorks. I don't know if he knew Steven Spielberg well, but they had, met each other, and they'd have, like, meetings in his house or something. Mm-hmm. People like Mark Russell, who worked alongside Steven Spielberg, and he's been very helpful with this project, and he worked for Spielberg's executive assistant, I think, who was a woman named Bonnie Curtis. Bonnie Curtis, actually, was funny. I was reading this new biography of Stanley Kubrick, and just out of nowhere, she was quoted in it. Like, the authors interviewed her, I think, and I was like, oh, wow, that's the Bonnie Curtis who Mark was telling me about, from the Mothman film and all that. And Bonnie Curtis wasn't involved in this film, I don't think, but it was sort of an informal sort of thing where I think... newspaper reports from the time say that Tannam, I think, told some people that Spielberg said he'd watch the film when it was done, this Mothman film, that kind of thing. Informal, friendly relations there, but also quite good professional relations too. And so he knew people in DreamWorks. He knew people who had access to equipment, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Some of them, Mark Russell by then was already quite deep in the film industry. He was working on Saving Private Ryan. He recently did a very, very big, his name is splashed across the end credits of this recent film, In the Heights. You may have seen that, the musical.
I haven't, no.
With Mark Anthony, actually, the singer, as a cameo in it, and a few other people. I'm terrible at remembering names, particularly when I have a cold. The woman from Scream 6 was in it. I can't remember the name.
Nev Campbell? Not Nev Campbell, was it?
No. This was...
No. I didn't make it past Screen 2 or 3, probably.
Possibly. It was a good-looking bunch either way. And basically what happened, Mark was... so he was the visual effects supervisor for that movie. And his name splashed across the screen. And, I was just like, oh, wow, when I saw that. So he was already, even in the 90s, very deep in Hollywood. And there were some other people who helped on the film, the Mothman movie, who sort of were back then just starting out and now are doing very well in their sectors of the industry, like Christopher Probst, American Society of Cinematographers. He's done just, oh gosh, look him up. The amount of music videos he's been the director of photography for. It's just amazing. People like Eminem, people like Ariana Grande. He's probably done 3 for her at this point.
Jeez.
And so who else? A lot of people. Jay Holben, he's a filmmaker now in his own right. Chris Rausch, who was the key grip worked on films like Whiplash, stuff like that. So
this is a real dream team. They had they kind of assembled like a really great crew. It sounds like by all accounts, this film had everything going for it.
It did, and unfortunately, as others have pointed out, like when you have what seems like a fairly simple plan, they were going to go to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the little town where the Mothman weirdness in the 60s happened, as your listeners and viewers will know. When you have a clear plan like that, sometimes it doesn't always go according to plan. And definitely the crew experienced that. So just remind me, have you seen the little sort of have you seen the documentary at the festival or whatever? Or...
No, I haven't. No, so I've seen the trailer. I'm dying to see it.
So you're new to this as well. Perfect. Okay, cool. So it'll be it'll be good scaring you a little bit during this.
Yeah. Please scare me.
Just some. I don't know how soon you want to get into it, but basically they arrived in Point Pleasant, and it was a very, very welcoming town. When I say that some bad things happened to them, it wasn't the majority of the town. Unfortunately, back then it was a very poor town, I think, and some people were taking advantage of that. Now, people who've listened to your podcasts, I mean, they'd be familiar with the whole story about the Men in Black.
Of course.
So, if I were to say that the Men in Black were following this crew, it may sound very silly. But if I try and explain that basically from what the crew and the locals have told me, they were not aliens dressed up in suits and all that kind of thing. They were just some people who were taking advantage of the economic situation the town was in back then, before Mothman tourism, for the Richard Gere film. And long story short, the town, up until I'd say the early 2000s at least, it turned out a hotspot for the Pittsburgh Mafia.
Wow.
And, you know, they were not happy that Tannapel's crew were there with cameras, and certainly in my documentary you'll see the reaction from the crew as they have one or two, you know, hairy encounters with people who didn't want them being there, and you see the aftermath of that and them discussing it, and their testimony and the locals' testimony too. The locals have been so helpful at you know, filling me in on what was going on in the town back then. You know, it was just something that would come up naturally when I'd ask them, oh, by the way, was there anything about this? And so most of them would say, oh yeah, that was going on back then. And, you know,
wow.
a few would just say, I don't want to talk about that. You know, I don't want to talk about, you know, understandably. So, you know, again, most people weren't involved in this. It was people who were, you know, just a few people who were connected, that kind of thing. I don't know how much you want to get into that. But,
well, I want to get into as deep into it. You know, I obviously do not want you to spoil any kind of, you know, too much about, you know, you have a film that's coming out. So I don't want to, you know, you want people to see it. So I don't want to, like, you know, you just feel like you're spoiling anything. But
that's fine.
I would ask this really quick, because I'm like deep into media studies. I'm deep into high strangeness. I had never heard that there was a Mothman movie that was attempted to be made in the 90s. How did you discover this?
I don't know. I think it was...
Really?
I mean, genuinely, I think I was... I don't know what, like I was probably 17 or something, and I think I read that, you know, there was all this kind of creepy sort of like, you know, I think how it got brought up was like, there was a rumor that, like, you know, oh, the Mothman curse, and if someone does a book on the Mothman or whatever, something bad often will happen to. And I think it was that basically the guy who helped do the music for this particular film, you know, died in quite sad and possibly slightly unexplained circumstances, but that happened in 2000, and that happened in Los Angeles. That didn't happen in Point Pleasant, and so it was sort of brought up like, you know, oh, and he was working on this Mothman movie. That was how I first heard about it, and then obviously it was a few years later, back in 2020, so when I was probably, what age was I then, 23, 24, something like that, that I then actually kind of thought, like, you know, yeah, maybe I'll try doing a little project about this. And back then it was for a student newspaper, but obviously I'm no longer with that newspaper, and it grew into something a lot bigger. So that was how I found out about it, yeah. All we knew was that there was a trailer available. It was about 1 minute long, I think, maybe even less. That was all. And that no one knew what happened to this movie. So,
oh my God.
They were scared, apparently. The crew who made it was all that was on the internet. They were scared. The director doesn't want to talk about it. That's that. So it was intriguing, yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, immediately when a director, when a crew says, I'm scared, and the director says, I don't want to talk about it, well, guess what I want? I want to know the truth behind this more than, you know, like, that is, if you're a curious person like myself and yourself, I'm assuming, that is going to raise up some antenna. I don't know what I'm talking about. But that's going to get your interest. That's going to catch your interest. And obviously it caught your interest enough. So like, hey man, there's a documentary here.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I think, you know, from talking to Doug Tanaple, I think, I mean, miraculously I was able to get him to do an interview for this project. And really, I think that, like, the reasons for the film not being released aren't as shocking as people may think. But certainly what the crew experienced when they were making the film does make, obviously, it makes, you know, speculation can run rampant, all that kind of thing. I think the reasons why the film wasn't released won't be as shocking, from what I've been told, as what may be assumed. But what happened to the crew when they were there, and the perspective on this now quite famous town, was the real story here, as he pointed out himself in his interview. Doug Tenable, that's the real story here.
Right.
Strange things going on back then that were not supernatural in nature, at least as far as they saw.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, while the supernatural can be creepy and scary, there's nothing more scary than human. Like, humans are the scariest, obviously. By far. I'd rather see a monster any day than like a weirdo in a, late at night in a weird park.
Yeah, just look at Nicolas Cage.
Yeah. Perfect example. But Matthew, look, you can, this is up to you. How much can you talk about like the actual, like, what was scary? Like, why were people feeling threatened to such a degree where they pulled the plug on the film? And like, you can skirt around that answer as much as you want, because I know you have a movie coming out, you want people to see it, so you don't want to give things away too much, but
I've done some other interviews about this, so I'm not too worried about giving away too much. Obviously, some stuff will be left for when people see the film, which is very exciting. But in terms of the threats and stuff like that, to the best of my knowledge, wasn't what made them pull the plug on the film. The film was not released, I believe, mainly for artistic and logistical reasons, stuff like that. What happened, though, in the town was, yes, there were threats from a few select individuals. They were scared. They did finish filming. They did manage to complete the filming. From what I've been told, there was just a sense of, look, I mean, we came all the way out here from Los Angeles to West Virginia. I mean, let's just finish this thing and then go. And, multiple crew members told me it was very quick when they got out of there. It was just so, and these days, that's just, it's kind of the opposite. Like, I mean, honestly, there are people who just love the town so much they want to move there, and it's wonderful seeing how far it's come since then. This was in the 90s, different time. Quite like where I live, as I mentioned earlier, just different time, different circumstances, all that kind of thing. But, one example, I suppose, would be, they had several people saying, like, don't film me, make sure my face isn't in your film. If you catch me in the background, just make sure I'm not, and that was fine. And, but then they get quite agitated, these few people say, hey, I said don't show my face. And I was like, it's fine, we're just setting up the cameras, And then one of those people turned up in the woods with an AK-47 while they were filming, things like that, and you'll see them talking about this, the crew, when you see the documentary, things like that, And he was fine, it was fine, they just kind of played it cool with him. I think, some people just wanted to keep an eye on what they were doing for some reason, and then it kind of, they heard about what may have been happening back there, and, this documentary then has loads of interviews with the locals who, confirm, that was happening, stuff like that. So that's one example, anyway, of a very hairy situation that really did not make them feel good. No, I mean, understandably, when you're in the woods at night and some guy with an AK-47, it's,
Yeah, I would not like that. No, thank you.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. No, I'm trying. No.
Machine guns, I'm a little freaked out by, I'll admit.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, a question I have, and like, again, feel free not to answer because you don't want to spoil, but like, when I think of the mafia, right? All my mafia references are probably from The Godfather and Goodfellas and like The Sopranos, right? But you kind of perceive them operating in bigger cities, where organized crime can have a bigger impact. But when I think of the mafia, I definitely don't think of them in a rural community like Point Pleasant. Like, what was the mafia doing, like in Point Pleasant per se? And I know you maybe can't answer that exactly, because, without giving something away, but
without going into too much detail, I can briefly explain why that very strange situation of a group like that operating in a rural town was happening. If you almost imagine a diagram where you see at the top, and at the presentation I gave at the Mothman Festival before the film, I was able to finally put that diagram on the screen. I was like, oh wow, it's been in my head until then, But it's sort of like Pittsburgh, and we know a little bit about the Pittsburgh Mafia. They're quite a famous, notorious crime family, not nowhere near as big as they used to be. I think the last known made member died during the pandemic, so they're just, there could be more out there, I don't know, remnants of it. So imagine Pittsburgh at the top of the diagram, then a line going down to the town of Wheeling, West Virginia.
Sure.
We know about, well, some people do, but it's not as well known, the mafia activity that was going on there, which was an arm of the Pittsburgh Mafia, and you can go reading about that, about Paul Hankish, or Paul No Legs, as people used to call him, because he lost his legs in a car bomb, actually, by one of his rivals. So Wheeling was like back then people would say the crime city of West Virginia. It was...
Really?
Oh, yeah, it was where the Pittsburgh Mafia had all their... well, they had it in other places too, as we'll get into, but that was where they sort of had their guy in West Virginia. He was from there, Paul Hankish. Then imagine that line going down to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, just down the valley. Paul Hankish, I found out recently, actually, when I was at the festival, an official in the town told me, Paul Hankish was frequently in Point Pleasant before he was sent to prison in 1990-something. So, yeah, that's where it comes into play. And it's like Paul Hankish's guy, his own guy, was in Point Pleasant. He was a local. He lived there for years. I'm not going to say his name because his family still lived there, and so yeah, that was how it all came into play. And I will be able to say that illegal gambling had a huge part in this.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. I was wondering what brand, because I know numbers running, gambling is kind of the bread and butter when you think of the mafia, but it was illegal gambling, huh?
That was a big thing, and sadly there were other things going on then probably as well. I have been told from some of the crew basically told me what initially they told me as well was that they heard that about the TNT area. I'm sure you're
of course, yeah,
exactly. That basically there was marijuana being grown there, and they were told that this was the mafia growing it. Now, some of the locals have told me, "Oh, that absolutely was happening there," but I don't think it was the mafia kind of thing. So, a bit of confusion there. I'm not exactly sure what was going on there. We know there was marijuana being grown there for years. The main thing that both the locals and the crew told me was that the gambling was the big thing. This was when gambling was illegal in West Virginia, and the crew. Some of them told me stuff about they'd walk in. This was not every establishment. This was some establishment. These were some establishments. Most people in the town were not involved in this activity. But there were some establishments where just, almost like in the last environment you'd expect to see one of these. You'd see a spanking new gambling machine, stuff like that.
Like a slot machine?
Yeah.
Really?
Videos of this are in the documentary. We got some behind-the-scenes footage from an actor in the film who very kindly let us use it, and it's never been seen before. He just found it in his attic after my interview with him. He was like, yeah, you can use this, which is brilliant.
Hell yeah.
So, yeah, there's proof of that. And, that's the gambling was the crux of it. Now, I've been told that there were some possibly mob-related murders that happened over the years in Point Pleasant back then. That obviously is a bit harder to kind of, get, that's more of almost a, as these things go, harder to get the facts on sometimes. All we know is that some strange deaths happened, and strange disappearances, and in some cases not solved.
Right.
And some locals have said, oh, I heard that was because of who kind of thing, who was involved allegedly in the mafia kind of thing, things like that, So, yeah.
So, when the mafia, I just don't understand the machinations, which I'll probably understand it a lot more when I see your film. But, when they come to a town like Point Pleasant, or when they did come to a town like Point Pleasant back in the 90s, were they bringing like their crew? I know you said there's a couple point people like the no legs guy, but were they kind of like coming in and like hiring people who were like on the fringe of society, like maybe jailbirds or something, like, you know, rough around the edges, and like, and kind of saying like, hey, you're going to work for me now, we're going to organize this? Or were they bringing in like people from Pittsburgh to come run this little town?
My understanding was it may have been a bit of both. In terms of Pittsburgh specifically, I'm sure there probably were some people there. I mean, it's all kind of a sort of thing where almost like a family tree of Paul No Legs Hankish, who was the Pittsburgh Mafia's guy. He was frequently in Point Pleasant.
Right.
Friends of his were frequently in Point Pleasant. I'm sure there were. I mean, I don't know, but in terms of from Pittsburgh specifically, the city, I would imagine yes, there were. We know that there were people from the Wheeling, West Virginia area, along with Paul Hankish, who did come down to the Mason County area, which is where Pleasant is. For example, and I've talked this on another podcast, so I'm not afraid to talk about this. One guy, what's his name? Jesse Anderson. Jesse Anderson was an accomplice of Paul Hankish, and in the late 80s, according to newspaper reports, he decided to travel apparently all the way from Wheeling, West Virginia, up there, all the way down to Point Pleasant, and then across the river. It doesn't explicitly say he was in Point Pleasant, but locals have told me he was in Point Pleasant. He went across the river from Point Pleasant to rob someone, apparently.
Wow.
Now, I think, you know, it's fair to say that there's probably a bit more to the story than what was reported in a situation like that. But anyway, basically, end of the story is he got shot. He got shot and died. You know, man was reportedly acting in self-defense. So that's the story there in the papers anyway. Now, I will say some locals have told me some stuff regarding that, and, you know, that I can't talk about. I can't talk about that.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's the one we're talking about. And he was an accomplice of Paul Hankish, Jesse Anderson. You can go back and find all the indictments and stuff like that about that. Paul Hankish's guy in Point Pleasant, how do I put this nicely? You know, there were certain people who were not caught in the grand scheme of things, let's say. I do have to be a bit vague about that, but there were certain people who were not in Point Pleasant who were not caught. It was not a widely known thing or a thing that they'd been in court for. Some of them, it was stuff that was very much under the surface, a bit like we were talking earlier, the power politics and all that.
Yeah.
So
here's a question I have for you. So going back to our mutual buddy Tanner Boyle, he wrote this absolutely drop dead wonderful Substack series on you know, the Mothman, kind of like the era in 66 and 67 where all this alleged, you know, high strangeness was happening. And he points out some very interesting things going on with union strikes and Union Carbide, the big like chemical company right by there, which employed like, you know, the vast majority of people in Point Pleasant and across the river in Ohio. And without going into too much detail about that, I first off would recommend everyone reading that Tanner Subtext. It is fantastic. But it kind of makes, when I heard about your documentary, it started making me think like, well, your documentary and Tanner's kind of idea, they kind of in a way are like, I wonder if there's connections. Like, I wonder, do you have any idea if the Pittsburgh Mafia was around during the 60s when all this stuff was happening? It was.
Oh, yes. I mean, sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. Yes, this, from what I've been told, this started in the 60s. I don't know, was it early 60s or mid 60s? But by the time of the Mothman stuff, the weird kind of, you know, Mothman Silver Bridge, all that sort of stuff. And the Silver Bridge was an unrelated tragedy to the Mothman thing, I personally think.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, the Mafia stuff was happening in the 60s. Yeah, the locals told me that. That was when it all kind of really came in full force. And there was a leisure spot, I'll just say, that I don't think it's around anymore, but I don't want to say which one it is just in case. But that I was told by a local that was where a lot of them hung out. They went there for meetings. You know, you just see all these fancy cars there, and that you'd be like, oh yeah, okay,
right.
So that kind of thing. And so when I was there about a month ago for the festival, for the premiere of this documentary, some locals, I think, were talking about the same establishment. There was some stuff going on potentially involving the money and who was running the books of that place, kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, that was in the '60s. That place was operating in the '60s. So yeah.
I mean, when you think about, you think about John Keel's book and you think about all the Men in Black stories, you're like, well, I mean, I'm not trying to like go into physical appearance archetypes, but it wouldn't be hard stretch for me to believe that there was mafiosos if they were around and wearing black suits and driving black Cadillacs. I mean, it's like, I mean, it makes you wonder if like the supernatural Men in Black or the governmental Men in Black, however people were perceiving it, they were just mistaking people in the mafia for it,
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would think that too, definitely, were it not for the fact that, it's kind of like, well, how do you explain all the weirdness involving... I'm not saying I believe in the Mothman or not, I don't know, but people clearly saw something.
I think something was happening. I do too. Like, I think they definitely, like, things were happening, but I think paranoia was also running rampant in the town. And so if outsiders from like a city, like if you lived, I mean, this is me just guessing. I'm guessing in a rural town, they didn't see people in 3-piece suits driving black Cadillacs too much. So they would almost look like an alien to locals. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so if all this weirdness is going around, they may associate the weirdness of city folk. Look, this is me, total speculation, but it makes me, once I heard about your just the premise alone of your documentary, it made me think of, first off, Tanner's piece, and then kind of like taking both these like slices of information and then putting it in the context of Keel's book and going, there may be more to the Keel story. And like, while I love John Keel, it is impossible to double check any of his references.
Yeah.
On these, we are taking one man's word for all this stuff. You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I didn't quite know what I was reading for half of that book, and bits of it were incredibly well written.
Oh, yeah. I love the book. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a confusing one, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. So, is there any more you want to tease about the documentary, or do you want to just kind of leave it there? I mean, like, you've teed it up really well. Like, if this is a pitch meeting, I'd be like, yes, let's buy this because I want to see this documentary very bad. But is there anything else you would like to say about it? Kind of like.
You'll be able to see it soon, and I'd encourage everyone to go looking for it when it's available. We're talking about the sort of distribution options right now, all that kind of thing. I'm getting geared up to get into, the big discussions surrounding that. So on that note, though, if anyone has any ideas regarding distribution, if anyone knows anything about distribution, I'm all ears, because this isn't a conversation. These aren't conversations we're having that other people can't be involved in if they know stuff about distribution, like yourself and other people, and people like yourself who are podcasters who might want to help promote it, all that kind of thing. Hit me up, and people can give their advice as well, particularly about distribution, because that is something I'm quite a novice about, and that is a big thing that is
it is the toughest part about making a movie. It's like, I got the movie, and now how do I get it out to people? And so it's hard. What I can say to you is it's never been, while Hollywood is dying, independent film is thriving. So self-distribute, I know I have friends who are distributing straight to Tubi and Freevee themselves, and then just splitting the ad revenue with them. There are places, there's like a lot. Look, Netflix, HBO, everyone wants to have their thing on the shiny, top tier streaming thing. But right now, Tubi is crushing everybody. They get more viewers than a lot of those places combined, which people don't realize, like the paid things. So having a documentary on Tubi, while it doesn't feel sexy, it will get seen, and you can make money doing that. So
interesting.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah,
good to know.
I don't know how to apply to do that. Like, I don't know the actual machinations. I just know people are doing it a lot. So your movie will get out there no matter what. It's just a matter of putting a little grit into it, and getting grimy and probably doing a lot of it yourself, unfortunately.
That makes sense, and I'm perfectly willing to do that. And as I said, at the moment now, currently, and hopefully for not too long, it's just a matter of hearing all the different options, talking to people like yourself who know bits and bobs about this, because I know nothing about it, and basically then going with the best options.
Right.
That's the stage we're at now. And then when that's decided, the film will be ready for people to see. And I'm very excited for people to see it.
Right. I mean, I off the air, I'll give you a couple ideas of like places you can go to. I don't have like an inn I can help you with, but like I feel like I know a couple places that are interested in this type of material.
Cool.
The Duplass brothers being one of them. They did the documentary Sasquatch.
Oh yeah.
Did you see that one?
No, I thought it was very, very good. I did.
It's similar like vibe where people think it's like the premise is there's a Sasquatch like that murdered a bunch of
much more dark, exactly.
But it's really about like the weed trade in Northern California, and so it's perfect. Like I feel like your film would be a good home for their company.
Yeah.
I want to ask you. You mentioned that you're reading a Kubrick book, and when you said that, I was like, Kubrick's one of my favorite filmmakers. Probably just right behind David Lynch. David Lynch is probably my favorite, and then I would say Kubrick. But Kubrick, going back to his early career, was one of, there's a couple other American filmmakers like Howard Hawks, and I believe, I can't think of it right now, but he was, in a certain sense, making parapolitical films. Does that ring true to you at all, like in a certain aspect?
Stanley Kubrick or Howard Hawks?
No, I'm sorry, Stanley Kubrick.
Parapolitical films, funnily enough, I guess that was one of the formative experiences, was discovering his films. And there's always a sense that something's going on beneath the surface in a lot of his films. So I guess you could make that argument. I mean, films like Eyes Wide Shut, which is personally probably my favorite film ever, to be honest with you. It's like that, obviously. I mean, the whole film is just permeated by this sense of there is weird shit going on here. It's like, and even before the cult and all that and all the weirdness around that, there's just this uneasy feeling from the very start of it. Like even when they're at a fancy party, and then of course they go upstairs at some point, and it turns out that there's some bad stuff going on here with the drug overdose and all that. So it's I mean, I still think to this day, where Kubrick must have got his ideas for a film like that, apart from obviously the Austrian novella that it's based on. Traumnovelle, I think is how you pronounce it. It's right. I often think wow, I mean, he captured that feeling so well. What, if anything, did he have in relation to experience of that?
Right.
Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was just obviously he was a very good filmmaker. Maybe he was just able to convey that without necessarily, like how the Bronte, was it one of the Bronte sisters? Wuthering Heights I didn't like very much, I will be honest with you. Maybe if I read it when I was older, I would have appreciated it more.
Right.
Wasn't it like she was indoors all the time, but yet she was able to capture the feeling of being out in the countryside in Yorkshire, in England. Right. So it's like, maybe it's like that. Maybe Kubrick was just able to get a sort of imagined but realistic sense of what darkness and parapolitics and that sort of thing were like.
Yeah.
But maybe, as some people would argue, maybe he had some experiences of it himself, and who knows? So I mean, his films are just so mysterious. I guess you could say they're almost like some of them parapolitical films,
Yeah, they're not like straight up obvious parapolitical films, but I think the idea that Kubrick's movies are so rewatchable because you will catch new layers. You're like, just when you think like, oh man, there's 7 layers to this movie. No, you actually find out there's 25. And then like I feel like David Lynch is the same way, where like I'm almost wondering, like, is David Lynch sometimes making parapolitical movies? I mean, if you think of like Mulholland Drive, even Twin Peaks. I mean, it's like, Twin Peaks, the basic premise is, here's this wonderful, charming, I like almost like, if America could be like a slice of pie, it's just like, it was that kind of, shucks, America that like maybe foreigners perceive America to be like. But then underneath, everyone has a secret, and there is extreme darkness. That's a theme that Lynch played upon in nearly every film he made. You know, like
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's just for some reason, on a personal level, I've never been a huge fan of his films, and I'm sorry
hmm
to say that. I
that's
mean, I
okay.
think
Yeah.
everyone says how great he is, but I just now Twin Peaks, I actually sinfully have not seen, but I've seen other stuff like Blue Velvet and
Uh-huh.
Mulholland Drive. This one, Inland Empire. Do you remember that
Yeah.
one?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's insane. I love
I
it.
mean, I loved it before it went insane. I mean, like
Yeah.
it's sort of like the first 20 minutes are really interesting to some extent, and then it just veers off into this 3 hour. Oh, I mean,
Yeah. It's a
but
fever dream.
he's very popular.
Yeah.
So
Is he? That's good to hear. I mean, like, he's really not popular in America. But I know in Europe and a lot of other countries, he's like as popular as Steven Spielberg.
is he
But
not
here,
popular in America? Really?
not really. He's pretty niche, man. I mean, like, really, like, he has never been able to get a movie financed in America since Dune.
Huh.
All the money for his films comes from France and Studio Canal.
Oh,
And a lot of times, even like in the 90s, when he was still like kind of a popular, like artistic filmmaker, I mean, his movies were not doing, they would maybe screen for a weekend in a theater and then they'd be gone. But he's got this cult thing to him for sure. And people who are cinephiles really do like him. But like, he's not in the conversation at all in terms of like great American filmmakers to most people.
that is interesting. I didn't necessarily know that in terms of how he was seen in America. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Okay, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there's definitely a reverence for him. Like, I think he's like a filmmaker's filmmaker. Where like Steven Spielberg often has mentioned, like, wow, there's only one David Lynch. He may be one of the greatest American artistic exports this country's ever had. But Steven Spielberg is 1 million times more popular.
Yeah,
You know, like,
yeah.
And the thing is, like, and the thing about Lynch's movies too, it's like, how big can Blue Velvet be? It's such a dark film that,
Yeah,
you know.
and that was probably the closest that came to a one that I did enjoy, but I
Mhm.
just I don't know. It felt. I mean, obviously, it was sort of. If from my perspective, was it like it was trying to be weird so much, but
Right.
I know that like I mean people love it. I haven't heard a single person who doesn't like Blue Velvet. So, the song maybe I've heard people
Yeah.
who don't like that very much, but I mean the movie. I mean, yeah, I mean it was good. I mean that one was I was okay
Yeah.
with. But
Yeah.
yeah, I never got the same vibe that I do when maybe watching some of Kubrick's films. Although some
Right.
of his films, like I mean, I understand, have aged, you know, and not in a particularly. I mean, I know Clockwork Orange sometimes, like you know, it feels just particularly after the beginning sort of segment of it, it just feels a bit dated. I don't know, but maybe Barry Lyndon does as well at times. And,
Right.
you know, I think my granddad actually, he saw Barry Lyndon in the 70s and out of the cinema, he was laughing coming out of the cinema because he just thought it was so awful. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the story I heard. I mean, so, I mean, like, I don't know. But I don't know. It's okay. It's pretty good.
I mean, I don't hate Barry Lyndon, but it's my least favorite Kubrick movie.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a little boring. It looks beautiful, though. Visually, it's stunning, like all his movies.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
But it just, the pace is a little, it's a little off for me.
Yeah, it is. Now, there's a very good book written recently by a guy called Stephen Snyder.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I know.
Oh,
Yeah.
so
The Recluse.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I know him.
But
Great guy.
So, yeah, and he wrote a book, The Minotaur, sort of about Stanley Kubrick's life and career and the possible dark side that he may have been exposed to throughout his career. And
yeah,
it's interesting. It's food for thought, and you know, definitely recommend people read it. And he gets into the sort of backstory behind the making of Barry Lyndon, and it's interesting. It's certainly interesting. You know, that a few hairy incidents when making the film, of course, as you may have heard. So that was interesting to read about.
Right. I wanted to ask you, like, going back to the Mothman film, when you were setting out to, start crafting this thing or even outlining it, how much detective work was involved?
Oh, well, that's the bit I love most about all this. Sometimes the quite a bit of detective work. I mean, initially it was just sort of seeing, well, what references to this film have been made throughout the years and collating all that, if that's a term to use for this, but putting all that in notes, just having little links to it, and notes and Word, Microsoft Word or whatever. Just
Sure.
being able to, go back. And then obviously it got down to the interviewing of people. That was when the real nitty gritty sort of happened. And, basically sort of seeing, like, was there any validity to what some of the crew were telling me in relation to things like, the alleged mafia activity, that sort of thing. And sort of seeing if maybe, is there anything that sort of adds up, or, corroboration, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there was. And then obviously talking to the locals, that was the big thing. I knew that this would not be a project that would be possible to do were it not for the locals giving their perspectives as well,
Right.
their recollections.
How did you gain their trust? Because I am friends with some documentary filmmakers, and what they always tell me the most challenging thing is when they're going into a niche subject is to gain the trust and get people to talk to them.
Essentially, it was sort of just taking it from a historical lens, taking this project through a historical lens and emphasizing that, this is a project I'm doing about the town in the 90s. And I would ask questions generally about the town in the 90s. And that was sort of how it all started out. And through that, I earned their trust enough to, get into some of the stuff about the sort of mafia possible connections, just asking, is there any validity to that kind of thing? And it worked. I was pleased to say. I mean, it definitely, they told me, well, yes, I mean, there was stuff about that, and they were very hospitable, and they were
That's
able
great.
to, yeah, exactly. And so it was just making it clear that, like, I'm not here to sensationalize as well. That was part of it as well. This is a historical project about the town in the 90s. I'm not here to smear the town. It's telling the story about this film crew who were there in the 90s. Do you know anything about this stuff that they said? Or, and that we went from there.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Before, while I was preparing for this episode, I kind of binged your your podcast. It's not just a YouTube show; it is a podcast you can find on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, folks. Called Commendable, Commotion, which I really love the title. But you have some very interesting people on, and there is, like I kind of mentioned up top, this line that you kind of say in the intro, which I find very intriguing. And it's where the creative arts intersect with the strange world of parapolitics. Talk to me about that and like what that kind of means to you. I think I get what you're saying. Like it seems like there is. I guess your interest, when it comes to this podcast, is really you like to talk to a lot of artists and filmmakers and creators, but who are kind of focusing on some of these stranger aspects of life.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it started out sort of as mainly interviewing people in terms of, like, musicians or film people as a sort of starting jump off point kind of thing. Then my aim was to kind of get into the more investigative side of things as well. And certainly now I think I've got the balance quite right, where it is kind of, when I say balance, not just interviewing, we'll have someone who's a screenwriter in this episode, and then in the next one we'll have an investigative journalist, and then toing and froing, but actually, people who sort of do both.
Yeah.
And exploring topics that, like this Mothman one, which is kind of an example
Right.
of, where strange, murky, in some cases maybe true crime stories or parapolitical stories come out or can be found in the context of of the creative arts. I guess I said I've got a cold, so anytime my voice goes up, it goes like the creative art. So it's the creative arts. Yes. Oh, excuse me. And so the Mothman one obviously being an example of that, like a film production.
Yeah.
Like this strange documentary that never got aired, which my next particularly big project is about. There's a small one I'm making, as I said, The Panic in Bethel Park, about a journalist who traveled to Pennsylvania and it's about his journey out there when the rest of the media had mostly kind of moved on from that very tragic incident in Pennsylvania last summer. So stuff like that, and he had a filmmaker come with him and or a cinematographer, and he did some little shots and that kind of thing. So
right.
things like that. You can see both elements coming into play in these sorts of stories, you know?
Right. Would you classify? I'm a big fan of Adam Curtis. And would you classify him as a kind of like dipping his toe into parapolitics a little bit? Are you familiar with Adam Curtis's work, like Hypernormalization and films like that?
Remind me of other films he's done.
Oh my gosh, they're all like one word titles, and now I should say I'm a huge fan of Hypernormalization, and I've seen one other. I cannot remember the other names. But I feel like you'd be very into Adam Curtis if you haven't looked into him. He's a British filmmaker.
I'm looking him up now. Okay, wow, yeah, he's done a lot. Okay, yeah, no, it looks like he's big into this kind of thing. Oh wow,
Yeah,
okay, he's won a bunch of BAFTA awards. He's won a bunch of those.
Yeah,
wow.
You should really watch Hypernormalization. I think that's a great intro to him, and it's a, it's not like a lot of his films are not easy watches. They're not like going to make you feel great afterwards, but they're revealing some undeniable truths that are kind of uncomfortable at times.
I'm reading about him here. I'm nearly sure. Now, it says he was given the Alan Clark Award. Alan Clark, I saw one or two of his films. He was a sort of experimental filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
He did one called Elephant in the 1980s, which is basically, 30 minutes of a camera following random people walking around 1980s Belfast. And obviously with the, sort of violent interludes in between. But, it was kind of interesting. But it was the basis for Gus Van Sant's film Elephant, which was
I didn't know that.
The Columbine sort of shootings. So that was an interesting one. So it says here he's won the Alan Clark Award. He's Sheffield International documentary. Yeah, he's done loads here. I'm going to definitely check him out.
I think you should. I can speak for Hypernormalization, where it is it's a very good movie. I think it's long, it's good, but are there any kind of documentary filmmakers that you like, not saying you're trying to emulate, but like who inspire you, who you're kind of like, they're doing the good work and I would like to be considered in the same realm as them?
Yeah, as you rightly mentioned, I'd never want to emulate anyone's work.
No.
And, I sort of try and sort of stick to my own guns, and then that's where the real kind of, there was a quote from a filmmaker about like sort of, he saw too many people trying to be Steven Spielberg or trying to be Stanley Kubrick and people like that. And so that always stuck with me because I kind of realized, I think he was right, that filmmaker, I think it was M. Night Shyamalan. How do you pronounce his name?
Shyamalan, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was him who said it in an interview with someone over here, actually, in the Ticket, which is kind of an arts magazine in the Irish Times. It's done weekly. So, filmmakers. Well, Stanley Kubrick was the one who really started making me get into film, but also Alfonso Cuarón from he did the film Children of Men.
A great movie.
Yeah,
it's very so good. I love it.
Very good. It's very good. Yeah. That I think even before Stanley Kubrick, that was the first inkling I had that, like, oh wow, there's so much things at play here in this movie, how it's made on both the technical. I'm not very techy, but just on a stylistic level, on a tech level, on a creative or whatever acting level, it's just brilliant. And
agreed,
things like that. Then of course I got quite into films by and novels actually as well by this Italian fellow Pier Paolo Pasolini.
Okay.
So have you heard of him?
He
had a rather sticky end. He was murdered in the 1970s.
Oof.
And so he didn't get to make as much stuff as he could have, sadly. But he was very prolific. And, his novel, Petrolio, which allegedly has a missing chapter.
Wow.
No one can apparently find where it is. And all this kind of... And that's a brilliant example of, the sort of Commendable, Commotion sort of... focus on, like, the parapolitics and the creative arts, that kind of thing. Some of his work, really good examples of that, like, whether there was a missing chapter or not, I don't know, but it's very interesting to read about, certainly, and I encourage your viewers to take a look at that. Who else? I don't know, off the top of my head, you can get influenced by so many different films and books and stuff. There was... there's a filmmaker from Spain. He's a very long name. I'm just trying to remember. I think it's a lot of stuff on Netflix he's made, but also elsewhere. And it's hard to find if you're outside Spain. He did. So his name is Elias Simeon, something like that. Elias Leon Simiani or something like that. A very long name. But he did a very good series on Netflix called the Alcácer Murders. The Alcácer Murders, or El Caso Alcácer. And he also did one called it was something like, I can't remember what it was called. It was like 10.5 hours or something. It was about the terrorist bombing in where was it? Barcelona in 2017, I think. So that was really inspirational, just the way he makes his films. And he has this real quirky thing where he shows the films being made at times. He doesn't overdo it, but he actually shows his crew and himself making the projects as they're showing projects. It's done very well, and it's
a little fourth wall breakage right there.
Yeah, and it sounds kind of basic, but when you see it done, it's so exciting to see in a weird way. And so that was quite eye-opening, and realizing that, like, documentaries aren't just the stereotype maybe of what people used to think they were, these very like nature programs or something, or elephant reproduction or something. And that was kind of opened my eyes in that regard. The different, I mean, like, it's like watching a thriller, like, but it's real, and they're quite good at getting the facts straight on most occasions and stuff, and kind of showing these things that have happened, usually quite dark things, and in a very compelling way, which doesn't take away from the reality and the facts of the situation. So that was a big eye opener for me. Elias Leon's Simiani's work. Yeah, I think that's his name. I'm butchering his name.
Well, you're doing a good job.
It's like I should know his name, but again,
it's interesting because, like, you're coming, and your film and the timing of your career could not be better, because at least I can speak, from an American standpoint, we are absolutely in the golden age of documentary filmmaking. Not only that, we are in the golden age of true crime content. Some of the biggest podcasts in America are true crime podcasts. If you look at any streaming service, every month there's a new true crime thing coming out. And guess what? I watch all of them. I don't know, I'm a sicko or something, but, like, I do love true crime. And I don't know, what is it about true crime that is so damn compelling?
I mean, for some people, maybe, I don't know. I mean, in your case, what would it be particularly? It'd be interesting to know.
Well, I'm addicted to mystery, right? And so I do love watching the machinations of how a mystery gets solved, or mystery unfolds, or how mystery becomes even more mysterious. And there's no answer at the end, but just more questions. I love mystery in general. That's why I love folklore, mythology, UFOs, Bigfoot, and all that stuff. I don't have a belief system with any of this stuff, but I am so deeply interested in the mystery of all of it. You know what I'm saying? So I think, I think more human beings are compelled and interested in mystery than they even know. Yeah,
it's, for many people, sort of an innate thing. Maybe for everyone, it's an innate thing. I mean, certainly, with some people, maybe they like watching these things maybe about solved crimes or serial killers. I personally haven't really into that kind of thing.
Right.
For me as well, like yourself, it's kind of particularly if it's a mystery, then that's where I find it very compelling, because
yeah, me too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
well, there's a co-creative aspect to mystery. Even when you're watching media, in mysterious media, there is a co-creative aspect where I think, like, well, you're part of solving the mystery, and, like, here's a bunch of clues. Can you put them together? So it's almost like there's, like, it's not like watching a traditional fictional film. I mean, sometimes fictional film can do that for you, but there is this puzzle solving, I think, with true crime that I find very, like, satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree with that, and I think as well, on an intellectual level, absolutely, but also like with things like then you see these what do you call them, alternate reality games.
Yeah.
You know, that very much comes into play there as well, where they literally are, you know, these mysterious narratives or performances. Uh, I'd argue, put on whatever YouTube. Like some guy found this video, and then it turns into this whole thing, and people collaborate to try and solve the mystery, that kind of thing. And that sort of, yeah, I mean, that's sort of almost like a development of that idea, certainly. And in many cases, you know, some people initially think it's real.
Yeah.
You know, like the Blair Witch Project, which wasn't necessarily an alternate reality game, you know, but it was
kind of.
You know, people thought it was, arguably,
right.
Yeah,
are you familiar with Joseph Matheny in Ong's Hat?
I am, yeah. I'm familiar. I've actually never sort of, beyond listening to some podcasts that Steven Snyder did with the guy, one of the people who worked on Ong's Hat. That's where I'm familiar with it from. I haven't. Is it a?
It's so hard to explain, but it really is the first ARG.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and it became, people started taking it so seriously where it almost became like a hyperstition to where people just believed it and refused not to believe. And still to this day, there are people out there trying to find the ashram, which was like in the middle of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. I'm not even joking. I just had Joseph Matheny on my show a few weeks ago.
Okay.
So you might find that episode interesting, but we really get into the nitty gritty of what it was like when it was happening. And it was almost like he created this thing and then it got out of control, you know?
Wow,
like, oh my God, people believe this, you know? It's like, you know, kind of like QAnon, where like all the Q stuff, I don't know really who did it or what happened, but like, I don't think whoever started it thought it was gonna like melt the brains of like millions of people.
Yeah,
you know?
I hope not. I mean, it's I wonder what was going on there. I have no idea.
Oh, who knows, man?
You listen to Steven Snyder's podcasts on that QAnon rubbish. Have you listened to those?
Oh yeah, The Farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually going to see him next week. I'm emceeing a conference in Nashville, and Steven's speaking at it.
Oh, cool. Which conference?
It's called Strange Realities.
Strange Realities. Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great one. I spoke at it a few years ago, and then they, I'm friends with a lot of those people, so they asked me to MC it the last couple of years, and it's a good time. It's a good time.
Yeah, sounds it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
well, they're doing it.
Nashville, Tennessee one day. You know,
it's great.
Nashville, I'm sure, would be amazing to coincide with that. And the I mean, that's amazing. You have the guy from Ong's Hat on your show. I mean, I'm going to check that out because I mean, definitely my, you know, on the academic side of things, my PhD is kind of about a lot of ARGs and how the parallels with theatrical performance and that kind of thing. And
he is all about, because he's an actor, he's a theater guy. Like that's his whole thing. So what he was doing with Ong's Hat was taking a new piece of technology and using it to perform like a theater piece, essentially. Yeah. You should have him on your show. It would be fascinating for you. He's one of these people who knew everyone in the counterculture.
Right.
Like he somehow like just knew every single Robert Anton Wilson and all these like major players that have had such ripple effects in today's society. He was around all of them. Like,
did he know Timothy Leary?
Well, I don't think he knew Timothy Leary personally, but he knew all his friends were like friends with Timothy Leary.
Right.
Like it was that kind of like Northern California crew, which basically started like the counterculture in the 60s, and he knew a lot of those people and was very inspired and influenced by them. So
yeah. No, it's amazing, and you can see the sort of historical precedents for these kind of things like ARG, and Stephen gets into it quite a bit in some of his podcast episodes, which is it's incredibly interesting. You know, maybe
it is.
Maybe I'll make Ong's Hat a case study in my PhD thesis. Who knows? I mean, maybe.
Talk to Joseph. I'm going to send you a link to this thing when we're done talking. But Man, you are such a fascinating person. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you while you're so young early into your career.
I'm at the ripe old age of 27. I'm very old. I'm an old man.
Right. You're a baby. You're a baby.
No.
Well, I feel very lucky to be able to talk to you because I think you're going to be putting out some great work for a long time. So next time I talk to you, you'll probably be like, I'm too big for Steve Berg's silly little podcast.
No.
But I'm so excited for your film. If you want to come back on and we can promote it when it's out, I would love to have you. There's many more things I think we could talk about, but you're a very interesting person, and I love how unique your interests and niche they are, because we live in what I can tell you for sure in terms of like media markets. The idea of things capturing the zeitgeist and capturing everyone's attention doesn't exist anymore. It's all about everything is niche, and all you need is a small fan base to have a wonderful career. So
yeah. I mean,
you're gonna find that.
I think so. I mean, I'm very grateful for that perspective. I really am. I mean, I do wonder, how do things that are quite niche gain a particularly big popular? Is that still a thing that happens, or is that?
Things are so transitory now. So when something like catches fire, it is for such a short period of time. Now there are definitely exceptions to that rule, right?
Sure.
But I guess what I'm sort of like, what I like is that you don't need to catch fire anymore. Catching fire, 10 years ago and catching fire today is totally different. Like, catching fire now is to really get a small community excited who is so passionate about what the artist is doing, and they'll support the artist, and that will be enough.
Yeah.
Now, you may not have 3 houses, but you may have like a really nice flat and get to do what you want to do for a living. So
exactly.
To me, that's good enough. I have a very working class attitude towards art and filmmaking, to where I feel like a lot of people get into cinema and stuff for reasons of like fame and riches and stuff, where that's not an option, really, for most of us.
No.
But if you're interested in being an artist and making a decent living, that is a wonderful goal to have. If you can do that, you won the lottery, in my opinion.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think that's going to happen for you, no problem.
Wow! I mean, thank you. That's well. I mean, it's this show's just amazing, and
thanks,
I'm
buddy.
going to check out that the other episodes, particularly that one about Ong's hat and others as well. To be honest with you, it all just sounds so interesting.
Good.
So, that's very grateful for being here. It's been amazing.
Oh, buddy, this has been such a fun conversation. Will you please tell the listeners where they can find more of your work?
Well, Commendable Commotion over on Substack and YouTube, and obviously you'll find it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. That's where you'll find updates about all these upcoming projects and stuff like that. I mean, my personal Twitter, X as it's now called, profile is there as well. Just Matthew Tannam Elgie, my name. You should be able to find me that way. But Commendable Commotion is the big place to find this stuff, and so.
Great. Well, I will have all those links in the show notes for people. And, buddy, do you have an ballpark idea of when the film will be released? I know you're still working on distribution and stuff, but do you think like early in 25 or?
I hope maybe early or mid 2025.
Great.
Definitely would like to see that happen. It's kind of because, as I said, I'm quite a novice to the whole Tubi, Amazon Prime, whatever side of things. I wouldn't want to put in case I'm wrong or inaccurate or that kind of thing. So definitely the conversations are happening, and I'm about to properly begin them. Good. And that's what's going to determine how and where it's going to be released. But rest assured, it'll be easy to see when it is out there.
Right. Yeah. Well, to make a film, to complete a film, to edit a film, to just have it ready for distribution is nearly impossible. It's very difficult. So congratulations on making a film and completing it, because many people don't.
Well, thank you. And certainly, the good thing is, like, it's easier these days to get all those processes done. I mean, like, filming with an iPhone, like I did just with my iPhone 13. iMovie. Like, I
Yeah.
didn't even use, like, the whatever
Right.
sort of crazy, wonderful,
Yeah, you don't
but
need to.
very,
It's
very sophisticated
yeah.
invention.
It really is quite amazing. Like you can, I mean, I have a friend who made a wonderful documentary that he shot at his Android and then edited on his phone or his like iPad, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And it is great. It's a great movie. Like I was like, oh my God, like I can't believe you can do this. It just takes a lot of grit, determination, and hard work. But yes, it can be done.
Sure, sure. And, it takes time, but sometimes that's good in a way because it means, if you can, then you get to spend more time researching as well.
Absolutely.
Getting
Absolutely.
the evidence, that kind of thing. So.
Well, pal, I'm really excited to have met you. It's good to have a new buddy. And you have a fantastic rest of your week. And thank you so much for your time. Everyone, this is going to be, please just plug the movie one more time. What's it called?
Mothman, the film that never was.
The film that never was, folks. But Matthew's film was. So we're going to be excited about that. That was a really dumb thing to say. I'm not going to edit it out because I want people to know how stupid I am. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Hi Strangeness. Enjoy your dinners tonight. Peace.